Well, my talk for today, believe it or not, is on freedom. Go figure. And, you know, how do we define freedom? But before that, a joke. I have a friend who I was talking to about being, stuck home all these months. And he said, yeah, I've been through 35 books. I said, 35 books? That's a lot of books. He says, that's a lot of coloring. Freedom. It's a fascinating thing. It's so multi-layered, and we deal with it in so many ways every single day. Trish was talking about freedom when she was talking about taking vulnerability negatively and then finally realizing that it was an act of love that freed her. That was an act of freedom. Whenever we free ourselves from whatever is holding us back, making us feel small, we are in freedom. We have this symbolic day, July 4th, where we talk about the freedom of our country, the freedom of independence, the freedom of self-governance over getting away from the crown, the king of England, and being on our own. And yet at that same time, all those folks who wrote in the Declaration of Independence had slaves. And so what freedom? So they were not talking about freedom as, when they said all men are created equal, they didn't actually mean it. They weren't thinking about that back then because they thought having slaves was a good idea. In fact, a necessary one. And our history as humanity, as a civilization, has had slaves as far back as recorded history. It is not true that slavery is done today and over. There are still places in which people are slaves. It's just done in ways that we can't see. There is still human trafficking that goes on. There is still child abuse that goes on. What child is free that is being abused in any way whatsoever? And yet what we teach here in our teaching is that freedom is something that we express from within. I mean, one of my favorite quotes of all time was Hurricane Carter, who was incarcerated for a crime he did not commit for 22 years. And somewhere around the 20th year, put out a book which said, I have never felt freer in my life, while he was still in prison. So there are ways in which we can rise above our circumstance and feel and be free. And yet, I wonder when we can stop having to do that. At what point will civilization move forward enough where it is no longer necessary to feel free in a situation of being jailed for when you did nothing? Where we have people where you can walk down the street without fear of being harassed, thrown to the ground, beaten. Where you can go to the store and come home alive. So yes, freedom is something that comes from within us. And yet, freedom is something that we as a collective consciousness must know and hold and stand for and take action for all beings. Transgenders are being murdered at an horrendous rate right now, simply for being who they are. So I am moved by all this. I am moved personally by all this. And I want to bring to you some of the ways in which I have been moved. Because I have had a wild week. It has been a tremendously wild ride. On Monday, I had an idea for putting together a collage. Let me show it to you. Some of you on Facebook may have already seen it. For those that haven't, let me show you what I did. This is what I posted on Monday in several Facebook groups. And because it's a collage, I posted it in an art group as well. Well, posting it in that art group lit a firestorm where before 2 hours had passed, there were over 400 comments on all sides of the spectrum. People who loved this piece, people who hated this piece, people who said it wasn't art, people who said it was art, people emotionally became so upset and forceful with their opinion and got so forward with it that the picture and myself by noon of the same day was blocked from that group. Blocked. I mean, the discussion was crazy in terms of the difference, the different people on different scales. Those who were so opposed to the fact that it was political, and those who said it wasn't political at all. I didn't at that time name it yet. It was simply a picture with no words. Now, obviously, it has strong emotional stuff going on, and everyone has the freedom to find their meaning in it, as we all do every single day. The interesting part was where freedom stopped when it was blocked. All of a sudden, conversation about it wasn't okay anymore. Somebody decided it had gotten out of hand and simply cut it off. Now, I posted it in many different sites and many different groups on Facebook, and in many different groups, it got similar responses in terms of on both ends of the spectrum, people who loved it. A Black woman suggested that I name it Still I Rise after the Maya Angelou poem, and I did, and that created an entire other uproar. I mean, it's been incredible. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of comments. I don't know if you've ever posted anything that has had that kind of hubbub, had that kind of impact, had that kind of engagement, but I have not. And so the engagement itself was just fascinating to me. And when I looked at it all, and I saw it in the context of freedom, I saw how complicated our country is when it comes to freedom of speech. How so very complicated it is to think when you're so right that makes somebody else so wrong that you want to stop them and take away their freedom of speech. And yet, once we do that, once we start taking away others' freedom because we disagree with them, we have taken away our own. Now, we have laws against hate speech in this country, not always very much enforced, but in place. And I'm not really, and I honestly sit on the fence around that. And I know that that's not a popular stance. But if we're going to have freedom, it's got to be for everyone. Now, that's different from violence. I am not talking about violence, but I am talking about freedom of speech on all sides. There was a man standing on a corner non-violently with a Confederate flag, just standing there with it, day in and day out. And on some of the Black Lives Matters groups, they wanted to go and spit on this person, throw stuff at him. and even kill him. And I thought to myself, how can you do to this man what you don't want done to you? And I said that. I didn't just think it. I actually said it. And again, it caused quite an uproar. But that's the complexities of what we all need to be looking at when we're thinking about freedom. It's a very polarized time in our country right now. And some think that's a bad thing, that it's horrible that it's this way. But to tell you the truth, I think it's great. I think this is our real opportunity for change because people are speaking up. The problem that happens when things feel like they're okay and we're all on the same side is those in the shadows remain in the shadows and we don't know they're there because they're not expressing their opinion. Now it's all out in the open. That's great. Real dialogue can occur. Real change can happen. Real change only happens when the extremists come forward enough so we know what they are saying, what they are doing, and what they have in mind with what they want to have happen. Once they come forward, they can be addressed. Freedom is an incredibly complex thing that we deal with all the time. So before this piece that I just showed you, the last thing I did was, we did a couple of good news items, which was fun. And before that, I did a short video collage of what different white people were doing to support racial equality. But it was mostly white people who were speaking in that video. And so I decided I really needed to do a piece on Black voices, to bring forth Black voices to speak to what they see as what white allies can do. And so in several groups, I was looking for Black people who were interested in being interviewed. And once again, it created an incredible firestorm, mostly by white people who thought what a horrible idea it was for me to ask Blacks to talk about their emotional experience, particularly since I wasn't paying anything. I mean, on 3 different sites, I was getting creamed like crazy from all these people saying, how dare I ask Black people to step forward and speak? And what was really interesting for me was my willingness to be with that, to allow their freedom of speech in their upset, to not take it personal, to know that they had every right to express themselves that way, as I had every right to express myself. And then all of a sudden, once again, there was a group of white allies who said they were going to ban me. They were going to block me. And I posted, that's okay, you can do that, but then where is the freedom of speech? And privately, an administrator reached out to me and said, we're not blocking you, and thank you for all your patience in how you handled all that firestorm. And then Tracy Brown, who is a huge Black activist in our movement, spoke up. And she said, I wonder why when this man, all he's done is ask for volunteers and asked for Black people to volunteer, where Blacks get to say yes, no, or ignore him, why all you white people think you need to jump in and say stuff. And all of a sudden, the white voices got very quiet. And once again, I thought to myself, freedom of speech for all of us. Freedom is complicated. Now, when I had the idea about the Black voices thing, it felt like a divine idea. That's probably part of the reason I didn't take defense or offense to what anybody was saying to me about out of nowhere, I was messaged by a Black woman who said she wanted to do it and was willing to do it anytime I wanted to. And so yesterday, we got together on Zoom and I interviewed her. She has been a Black activist for 50 years. She was brilliant. She was unbelievably brilliant, what she shared with me that I now have on recorded. And then she said, I think my daughter would like to speak to you. And so I'm interviewing her, and that's all she said. And her daughter got in touch with me, and I interviewed her daughter yesterday. And her daughter is in the Air Force and was just appointed by the newly Chief of Staff of the Air Force to be the point person for combating for racism in the military. This is the person I got to interview yesterday, is the point person in the Air Force on racism. And I just thought, talk about divine. Talk about opening to what true freedom of what's possible. I have these two extraordinary interviews that I will be putting into a little video that I'll be releasing probably by next weekend. And it happened because I was open to true freedom, did not take offense or get defensive, and know that everybody has a voice. It happened because I was willing to step forward and be okay with whatever anybody had to say about what I knew was mine to do. That's what's possible for all of us. That's why I keep asking, what is yours to do? Because when we step into that from a place of the divine, extraordinary things happen. Really. This week, with all that looks like, you know, if you were to read some of these comments, some of them are hate-filled. And yet, it's all divine. It all leads to the common good. And it is only my willingness to know that and to share that with you today that allows for us to rise. Because it's going to take all of us. You know, it's going to take all of us knowing freedom for everyone in a world that works for everyone. There's always things we can do. I love that Trish is having conversations with her sister and her family. Those are hard conversations with your family. Man, I've had some just hard conversations. And to stand in the face of that and be okay with what the other person's saying when what they're saying sounds so bad is what creates true freedom for everyone. When you can stand in the face, say what it is that is yours to say, while still allowing the other person to say what is theirs to say, true freedom reigns. It's hard. Freedom is hard. It's complex. There's so much to it. But like Tricia was able to rise above the comment of vulnerability into a place of knowing love, so can each of us. And the more we can do that, the more freedom reigns. Thank you. I love you. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What I give, I receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am, and so it is.